You can introduce Adrian now, please.
Okay, okay. Yes, so welcome to Adrian Lee, who has 25 years entrepreneurial experience as a licensee, franchisee, and an independent business owner, as well as having worked on the corporate side of franchising. She previously worked as a career transition consultant and continues to volunteer working with clients in career transition at Houston's Between Jobs Ministry, BJM. I think most of us are familiar with BJM. She has been a franchise consultant since 2003, and her focus at her company, Success Franchising, is helping individuals who are in a career transition find what may be their best next opportunity that is not the traditional job. This is such a crucial and frequently difficult time, and I'm quoting now from Adrian, and I love being able to really make a difference in people's lives to help them find more balance, flexibility, security, and overall success. The one thing I hear most often from my clients is, wow, I'm so glad we met because I never would have found this franchise without you, but it fits me perfectly. Adrian Lee, the president of Success Franchising, is a, quote, non-entrepreneur herself, but she owns 4 separate franchises and businesses. Adrian has helped hundreds of clients navigate their choices in business ownership as well as career transition within the corporate world. Adrian has an MBA from the Anderson Graduate School of Management at UCLA and a master's in spiritual psychology from the University of Santa Monica. She was the founding president of the Houston chapter of the Association of Career Professionals International and has been interviewed regularly on the Houston Business Show and CNN Radio. She's also been featured in Forbes, the Houston Chronicle, and numerous other publications. And we're so happy to have her here to speak with us about franchising. And if you would join me in welcoming Adrian, maybe unmute your mic and give her a round of applause.
Thank you. I appreciate the pinch hitting there, Tarek.
My pleasure.
Okay, so you've heard some of the formal background. What I will say is that everyone got an opportunity to look at what the topic was here, and you're still here early on a Friday morning, so you're at least open to the concept of franchising. And I will say that that puts you one step ahead of where I was before I started my business. And just to give you a little bit of background on how I started, because I think it's important from the standpoint of knowing where you are at this very moment in time. But when I was working in the outplacement industry, so I was working in a career transition firm, and occasionally people would come in and say, I'm thinking of starting a Curves, or I'm thinking of starting a Subway, or whatever the franchise at the time was. And my attitude at the time was, that's risky. We need to work on your resume. So when I got outplaced from the outplacement industry, which just goes to prove there really is no safe harbor here, I really started exploring what my options were. And I was looking for a job. I had no interest in being an entrepreneur, no interest in owning my own business. But as I was looking, I also, at the time, was recently divorced, had a very young daughter, and I didn't want to be leaving at 7 in the morning, coming home at 7 o'clock in the evening. So I was also resisting getting that next job. I was resisting the politics and the boss and the commute. And so with my background in licensing, though, I was targeting something, licensing and franchising are kind of similar. So I was targeting a job in the franchise industry. And as I was looking at the internet, trying to find what franchises are headquartered in the Houston area, I came across a franchise consulting firm, and I thought, well, they'll know how to find a list like that because I wasn't having any luck. And the more I talked to them, I realized that what they were doing, which is helping people find franchise opportunities, really fit my background perfectly. And what I realized even more as I talked to other franchisees in their system was that I could have the financial success and the lifestyle and the flexible hours and all the things that I was looking for without having that boss, but still having the support. And I also realized there's a really big difference between starting a business and investing in a franchise. Starting a business from scratch is still something that I consider really risky. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. But investing in a franchise was something I could really see myself getting the best of both worlds, both the comfort and safety of having systems and structure and support, but also the ability to go out and call my own shots and build the business the way I wanted. And that was now 17 years ago, and I can tell you by far the best decision I've ever made. And since then, I've owned a licensed business, a franchise business, and now Success Franchising. So I will say you're ahead of this curve just from the standpoint that I wouldn't have even come to a presentation like this. So you're ahead of where I started. So what we're going to talk about today, if I'm successful, is you're going to leave with the answer to two questions. One, there's always a question of the best way to spend your time. So one question is, does it make sense, both financially and from a time perspective, to take a look at this? And let's not kid ourselves, financially it's really important too, right? So we'll also talk about why franchising is attractive. And there's actually a franchise opening every 8 minutes in the United States alone, which it always sounds a little like a crime statistic to me, but just, you know, half of those are being opened by former corporate folks who've never been in business before. And there's a saying that franchising has made millions of people millions of dollars. So what makes it work? And what exactly is a franchise? And what do you get when you join a franchise system? So we'll talk about some of your options and choices so you have a better understanding of what's out there. And the idea of avoiding failure, it's a good idea to know what not to do as much as what to do, because many of the ways people go about this from the beginning set themselves up for failure rather than the success they're hoping for. And finally, we'll also talk about how to simplify the search and how we can help you. And I do want to just preface this by saying that none of our services have any cost. Our services are free to clients. We're paid by the franchisor, so don't feel like there's a sales pitch coming at the end of this. There is no sales pitch. So with that said, here it's why I said entrepreneurship looks risky. 90% of all entrepreneurial businesses, meaning businesses that are starting from the ground up, are out of business within 10 years. On the flip side, 90% of all franchises are still in business 10 years later, which I think is really interesting. Why do you suppose that is? And I'll help you out since we don't have an interactive forum here. But, you know, with an independent business, there's no proven track record, and people underestimate the startup costs, and they may lack the required skills. It's hard to be the operations expert and the marketing expert and the salesperson and know how to do all the accounting. The independent business owner has to be that chief cook and bottle washer and develop all of those systems. And that's where you hear stories of entrepreneur burnout and spending hundreds of hours a week trying to do all and be all. Plus, they frequently end up underestimating the startup costs and just run out of money before they become profitable. And then they're out of business. In a franchise, on the other hand, you know what the cost will be going in, and you can determine if it's affordable. But more importantly, you don't have to be everything and know everything. The franchisor has already created the systems and the processes, and they have a proven formula for success. So I've sometimes called franchising the halfway house of entrepreneurship. It's a way to move from the corporate world into business ownership and still have the freedom and flexibility and control of your own destiny, while you also have the support and the systems that you're used to in the corporate world. So if we really look at where your biggest risk lies, how scary does employment in the corporate world look? You know, the average employment tenure is less than 5 years. And the average to middle or senior level executive will only be able to stay in a job for an average of 2.3 years. And most people haven't saved enough money to retire early. So it's very hard to get to where you think you want to get to in this new world that we're living in. And the new COVID world is making it more interesting than that. So how many times have you thought, sure, I'd like to start my own business, but I think it's too risky? I'm sure everybody's thought that at some point or another. So if we really look at where that biggest risk lies, it's very hard to get to retirement. When you look at over the age of 50, it becomes much more difficult to find a job. Unfortunately, age discrimination is alive and well. And we're all governed by our perceptions, which come from what we've experienced in the past. And we've all been trained more to work in corporations. So it looks scary when we go out there and try and find something different. But when you really start exploring, ask yourself, when you're looking at those perceptions, is this what I think, or is this what I know? And remember that phrase, because it's going to come up a lot. Is this what I think, or is this what I know? Is it a perception or a misperception? So let's talk about what your goals really are. And I'd be willing to bet that everyone on the call today has pretty similar goals. You know, what is that vision? And some of the things I hear most often are security. You know, if you're getting laid off every few years, and certainly the oil and gas industry is renowned for that, frequently people are tired of that cycle. And having time for family and other interests, it's an interesting one. It's kind of generational. The baby boomers have worked so hard for so long, and now a lot of them are saying, I've given my all to the company, and I'd like to have some time for myself as well. The idea of independence and control. I hear a lot of clients say, I've made the company I worked with a lot of money over the years, and I'd like to make it for myself instead. I'd like to call the shots, and I'd like to create a good work environment, no more corporate politics. And we have the idea of challenge and recognition and prestige. The desire for those things is pretty universal. How about the ability to build something for retirement? And finances are always an important consideration. Having the ability to maintain the lifestyle you've achieved currently and grow beyond that and get rid of the ceilings imposed by the corporate world. It's something we hear over and over again. And having the ability to prepare for retirement with the lifestyle and security you want in retirement, or in some cases, having the choice of being able to retire in 5, 10, or 15 years. And perhaps the number one thing about the balance of lifestyle is what people are looking for. And I think that's kind of interesting because you don't normally hear balance of lifestyle and entrepreneurship linked. And that was where my impression was, that in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to work 100 hours a week. But balance and flexibility are important. And in franchising, you are given the ability to have that system so that you are not working those 100-hour weeks. It's a very, very different model. So as an owner, if you knew you could be successful as a business owner, would you rather work for yourself or someone else? And I think a lot of people, the answer is they'd rather work for themselves, and yet they don't. And I could ask the question, why? And if you're thinking about that, typically the answer is fear. You know, fear of failure is that number one reason, because there is no guarantee. It's not guaranteed in your job or business. And if someone does guarantee you success, I'd run the other direction. But you're not just going to be investing your time, you're going to be investing your money. And I bet you've worked very hard and built up some personal wealth. And the last thing you want to do is expose yourself to that risk. And that's the reality of this, if you're going to invest both time and money. The idea that it takes talent and skill is one that doesn't concern me as much, because typically the corporate world prepares people for this. It's prepared you with customer service skills or sales skills or operations or project management skills. And it's really a matter of finding the franchise that's going to be the best fit for your skills. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more later. So all these fears sound true and logical, right? They're true, but they're also intellectual reasons. If we're honest, and if we put it on that emotional level, what we're really worried about is fear of failure. No one wants to fail. And I'm certainly not suggesting you shouldn't be concerned about this, but the truth is everyone who goes into business for the first time, particularly coming from a corporate background, so not an entrepreneur by nature, is going to feel this to some degree when making a change. And that's what we're talking about, is making a change from the corporate world to independence. And for some, it's a bit of a culture shock. And it's a change in environment and culture and the way you make money, and that's often scary. So what separates people who do go into business from those who don't is really this: it's how they manage the fear. People who do go into business and do move forward, yes, they're fearful, particularly at the outset, but they don't allow their fear to manage their decision-making process. And the way they do that is they don't allow their perceptual issues to color their decisions. They ask themselves, is this what I think, or is this what I know? Those who don't go into business let their fear and their perceptions manage their decision-making process, and they make judgments based on perceptions or what their neighbor says or what their spouse says, not based on facts or data they've gathered. But the ones who do go into business keep moving toward that greater level of comfort one step at a time. And it's really like that question, how do you eat an elephant? Now, as you sit here right now, it has to look scary to go into business. It's not what you've done before. It's not something you have any details about. We're still talking about the general idea of business ownership. And frankly, if you weren't a bit scared, I'd be worried about your sanity. But here's a great quote from Napoleon Hill, who wrote the book Think and Grow Rich, and based on the life and principles of Andrew Carnegie. And the idea is that the way to deal with fear is taking action. And taking action for where we are right now in the world of franchising is simply getting more education. And if you get more education and that feels comfortable, take the next step. And if you find out a little bit more, maybe about individual franchises, and that feels comfortable, take the next step. And along the way, ask yourself, is this what I think, or is this what I know? Is it a perception? Is it a misperception? So let's talk about some other misperceptions of the franchise industry, or perceptions of risk. You know, it's going to work for someone else. And the easy answer is, we're all here, right? Everybody here is currently in a career transition, and it's going to happen again. And we just said the average length of employment for a middle to senior level executive is 2.3 years. And will your outstanding performance keep you employed? I don't think so. So let me ask something else. How many of you were able to work just 20 hours a week in your last job and still maintain the salary you had? It was more like 50, not even the 40, right? So is it something that you can grow into, a semi-absentee role? Probably not in the corporate world. And what about long-term security and retirement? A lot of us have worked a lot of hours and built up 401ks, but that's not necessarily getting us to where we need to go. So these days, there's a lot of people in their 50s and even 60s that are looking at business ownership as a way of keeping that income stream going into their traditional retirement years. So how do you reduce your risk? And the answer is buy a business with a system or a proven track record. And what I mean by that, you know, think about it. Would you jump out of a plane if you'd never jumped out of a plane before and just go strap on a parachute and jump out? Probably not. So, but if you go and strap yourself with someone who has been there before, that's a lot less risky, right? So we want to kind of take the same approach. And to illustrate the point, I want to give you a little bit of an exercise. So if you'll take a look at the screen here, and here we have a grid. And if I give you 30 seconds, just tap in order or identify in order. For number 1 is the number 2, the number 3, the number 4. And see how high you can get in just 30 seconds. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that. So ready? Go. All right. How high did you get? If you'll just write that number down on a piece of paper. And now I'm going to do this a little bit differently. Here's the system. If you look at this, we've drawn a grid to divide it into 4 parts. And the system is we're going to follow from one to the next. So number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's the system we're going to follow. So with that system, now if I give you the grid again, now identify the numbers in order. And I'll give you another 30 seconds and let's see how high you get. So ready? Go. So how high did you get this time? My guess is it's significantly higher. And I'm sorry we aren't able to do this interactively and in person. It's more fun when there's more interaction on this. But I think hopefully you get the idea. Having that system is really what makes a difference. It's the difference between working 100 hours a week and working only 40 hours a week. It's the difference between not running out of money because you're ramping up more quickly. So there really are reasons with that system that franchising provides a greater security net. So what we want to talk about next is reducing risk, because that's really what franchising is a risk management tool. And there's still a lot of misperceptions out there. Some of those we're going to take a look at, because I hear people say, no, but Adrienne, I'm not a franchise kind of guy or gal. And the reason they say that is, first, they confuse franchising and French fries. The truth is less than 26% of all franchises out there are food related. They just happen to be very visible. So in, I think, 17 years in business, I've worked with one person that's actually gone into a food franchise of a traditional kind, and there's been a few more in non-traditional. But it's not necessarily the highest area of focus. There are easier ways to make a living than with a business that has narrow margins, high employee turnover, long hours, perishable products, health inspectors. There's easier ways. We also have, in terms of the kind of opportunities out there, worked with people who've been earning $50,000 in their prior job and people that have been earning $500,000 in their prior job, and they've all found a place in franchising. And the opportunities can include things like buying yourself a job, and a lot of people would say, well, that's not what I'm looking for. I want something more. But if you look at the ability to buy yourself a job where you are working in the business, but you can continue to do that until the day you want to retire, that's not necessarily a bad idea. So that's certainly one model. What most people look at more, though, is investing in a business to build and grow equity. And that's where you have an actual business that other people are working and generating income for you. And believe it or not, there are some part-time opportunities as well. So you can start on a semi-absentee type basis, still keep a job or have a job. And when you've built maybe 2 or 3 units, then you let go of the day job. But at least you have that income or some income if you ever get laid off again. Excuse me. So some success stories. I could give you a lot more examples than these, and this is not to pat myself on the back for successes, but this is really to illustrate a couple of points. All of these people that you see over here on the left-hand side, these are the type names or the industries and titles of the people that I'm using as examples that have gone into franchises. And the main point here is that if you look at the company and the industry over on the left and you look at what's on the right, there's no correlation. And that's really the big take home from this slide, is that franchises are not looking for people with industry expertise. So coming from the oil and gas industry, don't think that you're limited to things that might be in the oil and gas realm, because there's not a lot of that in the world of franchising, unless we're talking about gas stations. But, excuse me, if you look at the title and think about the transferable skill set, and perhaps the easiest one is if we look at the bottom one here, as an HR director going into the retail design store. The gentleman that did that, moving into the retail design store, he was hiring 7 women, all creative designer types right from the get-go. And with those personalities, do you think that an HR background might have been helpful? It certainly didn't hurt him. That's really what the franchisor was looking for, was the ability to manage people. So when we look at which way is right for you to go, some of the other common denominators of people who do move forward, we had one gentleman share this: the higher you move up the corporate ladder, the fewer jobs there are to choose from. And again, age discrimination is alive and well. Or sometimes you have to uproot your family and relocate in order to pursue those job opportunities. And typically, people who choose their own business see more attractive exit or future strategies for themselves. They're creating better future choices. And they see franchise ownership as a good vehicle for doing this, such as creating an asset that they can sell in the future, or their income stream has value. They're able to keep their business or back away from it. And that's a really popular trend that we're seeing. People want to work and be involved in something, but they want to be able to control that involvement. So even as a semi-retirement strategy, they might only want to be involved part-time and then perhaps be free to travel with their family or whatever else they want to do. And another client I had, I think, put it really well when he said, you know, I could certainly go and get another corporate job. And that's the easy solution for the short run. It gives me the paycheck and gives me the environment I'm used to. But I was watching a Discovery Channel special on how the species thrived and the ones who adapt. So I could keep doing the same as I've been doing, but that's just putting a Band-Aid on my situation. And as the older I get, the risk is greater, and it's hard to get to my goal of retirement. I keep getting laid off every few years, and it's scary. Sorry, I accidentally moved forward here. One of these days. So harder to get to the goal of retirement. And kept thinking, you know, one day I'll have my own business. Someday I'll have my own business. And it's easier to just hope that things will change in the future. But by taking action now, I know I'm creating better long-term possibilities, and I'm creating a future that has more choices. So just to finish his story, the gentleman did go into business, and he's currently operating a very successful franchise, working with very large businesses to reduce their expenses in various cost categories. And he's quite literally made multiple millions of dollars over the year. So let's take a look now also at, I keep clicking too much, sorry. What is a franchise? So we've talked about some myths and misperceptions. Let's talk about what a franchise actually is. And all it really is a license to use the name and trademark of a company in exchange for both an upfront franchise fee and ongoing royalties. So it makes you a partner to that franchise company where they want you to succeed, because the more you earn, the more they earn, which of course is also where some of the fees come in. So you get the rights to the franchise and they get the fees on an ongoing basis. So let's talk about some of those fees. And sometimes people get a little uncomfortable talking about this because those fees are different from an independent company. The franchise fee is the fee that's paid up front to the franchisor. It's a one-time fee, and it's not the total investment. It's what you're paying really to be a member of the club. What are you paying to join that franchise? And I look at it a little bit like an insurance policy. What would you be willing to pay for the opportunity to move yourself from that 90% failure rate to the 90% success rate? And if you pick the right franchise, and a franchise that's the right fit for you, that failure rate is typically far lower. So we have franchises that have 98% success rate. And by the way, franchises rarely profit from this upfront franchise fee. It covers the cost they've had of developing the system. It covers the cost of your training and getting you up and running and giving you all the operations manuals and everything else. So for that $25,000 to $50,000, they're amortizing all of their expenses for developing a system where they've probably made millions of dollars of mistakes, and you're getting the value of their experience for a fraction of the cost. So the question is, what's the value of your time of getting access to a system that teaches you not only to learn what to do, but what not to do? So big difference. When we talk about royalties, typically royalties range somewhere between 6 and 10% of the gross sales or gross revenue. And the reason that it's paid as a percentage of the gross revenue is not to give the franchisor a bigger percentage. It's really so they can keep their hands out of your day-to-day running of the operation. You never have to have a discussion of, did you really need that employee, or did you really need to buy that car? You run the business the way you see fit, and the franchisor gets their money from the top. And I say here that the typical percentage is 6 to 10%, but it really depends on what the franchisor is providing for that fee. There's some outstanding franchisors that charge 17%. but that's because they're providing a good portion of the actual work that goes into the business. If you had to hire people locally to do that work, it would probably cost you 30% or more of the same service. So the percentage of the franchise fee is not really the relevant element. It's what you get to keep. And these royalties are built into the model. So when you talk to other franchisees about what they make, they're able to receive the kind of returns that you hear from them even after paying these royalties. So as long as you're making what you want to be making, you want the franchisor to be making money. You want them to be around for the long haul to be able to support you. So we have a story here, that's slowly but surely, and we hear people object to what the franchise fees and royalties are, but compared to spending 30 years developing a business and then having the big names take over, which is kind of what's happening these days, it's that Walmartizing of America, which actually now includes the fact that many of the big brands out there are franchises. And the franchises really are a better bet. It's a way to give yourself the greatest possibility of success at the fastest rate. And let me just share the story of a couple of gentlemen who attended one of our seminars who were considering the same franchise concept, which was a day spa. And at the end of the day, Norman, I'll use the name, felt that he could start a spa on his own. His wife had worked in one, and he felt that he knew enough that he could avoid the fees and be successful. The other gentleman, Ron, still felt a franchise was a better bet. It had the systems and the marketing, not anything of a brand name at the time, but still have the systems to bring customers in the door and compensate employees and the technology and all of those other elements. Well, I've kept tabs on Ron, and he now owns not only 3 of those day spas, he also is opening a second location of another franchise, and he's become a regional developer for another system. So very much more successful over the long run. And unfortunately with Norman, a few years later, he called to see if we knew of an attorney that could help him get out of his lease, because at that point the business had never really taken off, and if he struggled to build it, he invested more of his own funds. And by the time he had invested all of those funds, he'd invested far more than he would have with the original franchise. And yet at the end of the day, he was still out of business. So there really is a truth to how much the system helps. So we've talked about the fees. Let's talk about the total investment. This is what it costs for everything: out of pocket, borrowed, travel, training. If you couldn't get your hands on another penny, this is the amount that should be able to get you not only where the doors are open, but where you have working capital as well. And as you can see, almost 52% have a total cost of under $175,000. And anything under $175,000, just to put some perspective around this, is typically more service oriented and not one with a retail location. It could be handyman, commercial cleaning, professional consulting. There's dozens of non-retail opportunities. But one of the differences is in those businesses, since you don't have a big neon sign drawing people in, you do have to be more aggressive in bringing them to you. And that could mean networking or joining groups, or it could mean warm calls where you have marketing such as internet or mailers and something that's making the phone ring and you're responding to those inquiries. The 175 to 300,000 arena covers a number of the smaller retail or maybe smaller automotive type locations. The 300 to 600,000 is where you find the larger retail locations like day spas and dry cleaners and most fast casual food concepts. And the over 600,000 is where you typically find the larger food concepts like Applebee's and Ruth's Chris, or big fast food places like McDonald's, which is, by the way, about $1 million investment, or hotels and things along those lines. So that'd help put some perspective on the total investment level. And this is kind of the best news slide of the presentation. High returns do not mean high investment. You don't have to invest more to make more. And that's kind of counterintuitive because we're used to the idea that the more we spend, the better or more we get. That's how it works with cars or refrigerators or whatever else, right? But investing in a franchise, investing more won't give you a bigger brand name. It won't give you a more successful franchise. It won't give you the ability to make more money. What it will give you is more bricks and mortar. It's simply more of a physical location. It's what makes something more expensive. In fact, I can point out a lot of inexpensive businesses that on average will make more money than some of the bigger ones. But typically that means that they're either home-based or off the beaten path. So what that does mean is you have to be more sales-oriented and more willing to go out and call on customers in some way, shape, or form. So what we're actually looking for in all of this is something that matches your skills, and that's part of what we talk about when we go through the matching process with you. So now that we're talking numbers, let's also talk about where the money comes from. If we take these kind of in order, note that SBA is not on the top row. It's number 4 on the list. And I know everyone seems to think, oh, I'll just go and get an SBA loan. But it's really kind of a conservative lending environment. It may require more than you want to put in. It may require more collateral. It may require more paperwork and more time. So that's not necessarily the first line of defense that people are going to when they look at franchises. What we see most commonly is personal financing. And there's a lot of different ways that this comes about, whether it's savings or what people have liquid. More popular these days is using 401k funds. And a lot of people don't know that you can use 401k or IRA funds with no taxes and no penalties to start a business. And the short version of how you do that is you transfer money from your existing 401k or IRA into your newly formed company 401k, which then invests in your company's business. The nice thing about that is you're starting debt-free if that's what you do for the entire amount of the financing, because that's not an amount that ever has to be paid back. Your stock in the company is owned by your 401k as opposed to yourself personally. So it's kind of left-hand, right-hand transaction. Home equity is another way of getting financing. In Texas, we certainly have the homestead exemption laws, so no one's going to take your home as collateral, but you can take a home equity loan or home equity line of credit that will assist in some ways. SBA, as much as I said it's a conservative lending environment, there's still a lot of good possibilities, particularly with strong franchisors, and there's also a product called the 7A or Express SBA, and the Express SBA is a much easier loan to get. It's capped at $150,000. Does not require any pledging of personal collateral of any kind. It does require a personal guarantee, but much easier to get as long as you have a good credit score, meaning over 650. Another option for financing is leasing, and for any business that requires either equipment or vehicles, leasing can be used for at least the part to cover those elements of the business. The one thing I will point out on this Bank of Mom and Dad, which is our friends or family financing, is a word of caution. And there's a saying that there's 2 ships you never want to be on, a sinking ship and a partnership. And the problem with partners is you can have 2 people that are good friends, know each other well, would love to be in business together, but it's still like a marriage. And one of the biggest reasons that businesses fail or businesses are being sold is that there's partnership disputes. 2 very reasonable people can just have different ideas about what they want to do. One person wants to grow the company and reinvest money in the business. The other person wants to take money out. Neither one is wrong. They're just different. And when we talk about getting a silent partner who's just going to be an investor, I will tell you there is no such thing as a silent investor. And he who has the goal makes the rules. So very important to know what you're getting into before you do. Much better, if you can, do something in a franchise without a partner. In a franchise, the franchisor is really your partner. So from the sense of complementary skill sets, there's no need to have an additional person in your business. So let's talk about some of the advantages of joining a franchise system. You certainly get the proven track record, and in some cases that also means you get name brand. But some of the more important things are that you get that experience of all those that have gone before you. You get the group purchasing power, which gives you the economies of scale. You also have the most important, which are the bottom three here, the training and support. Can the franchisor teach you what to do and what not to do? And then there's marketing expertise. Most of us are not marketing mavens. So here, having the ability to have someone support you in it is very important. Plus the support of other franchisees, and that's perhaps the most important element of all, because those franchisees are the ones that are in the trenches with you, and they're going to be able to help you as you go forward in the franchise future. Some of the disadvantages, you really can't be the Lone Ranger. Try putting a tuna sandwich on your menu if you own a McDonald's and see how long you get to keep that franchise. You really do need to follow the system. I had one client that was doing incredibly well, but I went to see him one day and I said, "How are things?" And he said, "Oh, they've just fallen off. Nothing's working. Nothing's going right." I hate hearing that from clients. And I waited about 4 months before I went back because I was afraid of what I'd hear. And I went back and I said, "So how are things going?" And he said, "Wonderful, great, fantastic." I said, "Well, how did we go from great to terrible back to great?" He said, "Well, things got so bad, my wife and I got out the old operations manual," which is really just a testament to the fact that following that operations manual and following the system does help. Franchisors don't develop systems because they want to keep you in a box. They develop systems because they know what works, and they want you to do what works rather than what doesn't work. There's a great saying that franchising takes people who didn't think they could own a business and makes them extraordinary entrepreneurs. And it really is a strategy that's designed not only to gain, but to keep disproportionate market share. And what I mean by that is that franchise businesses account for about 10 to 12% of all retail and service businesses. But they take in 50% of the retail and service dollars. So it kind of begs the question, which side of the coin do you want to be in? The one that has 50% of the money and only 12% of the businesses to divide up money between, or 88% that only has 50% of the money? That's what I mean by the disproportional. But franchising really is a huge business, and when you begin to understand what it offers, it's no wonder, because there's greater safety, there's greater success rate. And what success means is not just that market share and profitability, it's also what it gives to the individuals that are the owners. But it generates one of every 7 U.S. jobs, and there are over 4,000 different franchises out there. So with 4,000 out there, we have to also talk about how do we find the one that's right for you. And before we get to the model of how it's right for you, let's talk a little bit about your return on your investment and what you can actually expect. And one of the biggest questions we hear is, what can I make? So let's see how it all works. And we're going to talk about how to calculate and maximize the financial return, because money does play a huge portion of your decision-making process. And while a lot of people may not want or don't have a Napoleonic desire to grow an empire, they at least want to replace their prior salary and perhaps grow beyond that. So we're going to show you what the possibilities are, because even if you do have the Napoleonic desire to grow an empire, that is doable in franchising. So this is a great book, if you haven't read it, by Robert Kiyosaki. It's the Cash Flow Quadrant. It does a great job of talking about how people make money and where does money come from. And if you look over on the left-hand side of the quadrant, the employee is the one, E for employee, they trade dollars for hours. So they have the least amount of flexibility and the least amount of control. The employer owns the job. And if they quit going to work, the money quits coming in. The S, or self-employed people, also trade hours for dollars, but they have more freedom and flexibility because they own their own job. If we look at the B, or business owner, those are people that are not trading hours for dollars. They have other people making money for them and are generating a return from that. So they don't have to go to business every day. My husband had throat cancer back in 2010, and the business kept running because the employees were running the business, and the money kept coming in throughout his treatment. And he is doing fine now, thank you. The I for investor. Investors typically get their opportunities from being in the business world. That's where they get to find out about other opportunities and other elements that will make them money. So typically investors, and I'm talking about investors that have real money invested, not just most of us with our 401ks and IRAs. So it's this right-hand side of the quadrant that we're focused on when we talk about starting with the end in mind. And when you estimate your return on investment, the smallest portion of your investment, or the smallest portion of your return, may be the W-2, which sounds very counterintuitive, because when we're talking about a job search, that's really what we're trying to maximize, is that W-2 income. In a business, you may try and minimize that because you minimize the self-employment tax. But in addition to that salary that you take, there's also the things that the company pays for you in pre-tax dollars, those legal perks, whether it's your phone and computer and car and health insurance and entertainment expense, things along those lines. There's a lot of things that the company can pay for on your behalf. Company earnings is simply another way of getting money out that's not salary, but that's taxed at a lower rate. So when you add those three up, that's your actual earnings as compared to your W-2 that you're currently earning. But the thing that people forget about is perhaps the biggest thing. Everyone focuses up front on how much do I have to invest, which is certainly an important part of the puzzle, but they forget to look at what is the increase in equity, because that's really the retirement plan of most franchisees. Is they're looking at what am I going to be able to sell this for when I want to retire. And when we look at retirement, let's do the math on the exit strategy. In an independent business, it may sell for less than a franchise business, and it may also require a business owner to finance the business to the buyer, because banks really like the resale on franchise businesses because they know the franchisor will be there to support them. In an independent business, they want the exiting owner to be there to support the franchisee. So it can be much more attractive when you look at the back end, again, starting with that end in mind, to look at a franchise business. So with those 4,000 opportunities out there in over 80 different industries, how do you find the right one? And let's look at what some of the choices are. And most franchises fall into one of these categories. And these are organized in order from two different standpoints. One is from most saturated to least saturated, down at the bottom. If I asked you all to identify 20 food franchises, you could probably rattle off the names of 20 in the next 20 seconds. Automotive might take you a little bit longer, but if we count tires and transmissions and auto parts and brakes and everything else, you could probably come up with another 20 automotive franchises in pretty short order. Retail gets a little trickier because it's sometimes hard to identify what a retail franchise is from just a retail company-owned box store. The big box stores typically are not franchises. So what we're talking about when we say retail is anything that you can physically go walk into that's not food or automotive. But I will say in retail, it's typically more in the strip malls as opposed to being in a big mall. So it could be day spas, it could be dry cleaners, hair salons, pack and ship type places. Education and home health is another environment, and home health almost deserves a category all on its own because it's such a large area, and still lots of growth. Both in education and home health, people will always spend money on their kids, and people will always spend money on their loved ones as they age. And priorities really do adjust there. But it's hard to name them necessarily because we don't see them as frequently. They're not necessarily as visible unless we've seen advertising on one or the other of them. When we talk about business services, if I asked you to name 20, you'd probably have a hard time even thinking of them. These are the ones we don't see, but there are just as many of as there are out there in this other arena. So in business services, we have things like business coaching and commercial cleaning and signage, and I just clicked again. All right. Okay. One more. Home services is the last here, and again, might be harder to name a number of them off the top of your head because, again, we don't see them. They don't have the physical location with that big neon sign. But any service you can think of at your home, whether it's lawn service, maid service, pesticide, decorating, flooring, there's a whole host of home service brands. Again, not very visible, but so much harder to come up with. And actually, the services arena is what's projected to grow the most over the coming decade. So here we have in order, most saturated to greatest growth. And these are also in order from most expensive to least expensive. Well, with that said, it sounds like we all ought to be going into business down here in the services arena, right? Least expensive, greatest growth. The issue with that is if you're not at least somewhat outgoing and willing to handle at least warm sales calls, you're going to be in trouble down here in the services arena because you don't have customers coming to you based on a physical location the way you do in these top three. So it's really a matter of finding out which fits for you more than just the cost of the business in the beginning. Some of the other choices you have are how many units. A single unit is probably the most common. But if you are interested in multiple units, the franchisor is interested in making it economically viable for you. They typically offer discounts on the second and third and beyond units because it's easier for them to have 100 franchisees that each own 3 units than to have 300 franchisees. A service territory is really the same as a single unit. It just means that it's a business that's providing service, for example, home services, maid service. So a territory is the same as a unit. And the area development is another arena that's a little bit different, or regional development goes by both names. What regional development is, it does give you the opportunity to own the rights to a large market like all of Houston or all of East Texas. And in exchange for owning those rights, you share both in the upfront franchise fees with the franchisor and in the royalty stream. So with that, it kind of provides an annuity, if you will. What you're really doing is you're responsible for your area of bringing franchisees in and being the local support in addition to the support that's provided by the franchisor. I will add that usually those opportunities are only available when the franchise is very young. By the time you have them built, so that it's a name brand, all the area development opportunities are gone. So it's a limited opportunity. That brings us to one of the questions on, do you want a newer franchise or a name brand? And I know everyone thinks that safety lies over here on the well-developed, well-established name brand type franchises. But there's some issues over there. With a name brand, we have a very small protected territory. You know, certainly we have those proven systems. They've trained thousands of people. They can certainly train you. But the opportunity for growth is really limited, and the ability to find a good location to begin with is almost impossible. The other thing about those name brands is by the time they've gotten to that point, they're much more market share oriented as opposed to individual franchisee centric. So it may not be as warm and fuzzy and caring and nurturing as it can be down in the lower stages. With the new franchises, though, I will say, let's use Joe's Donut Shop. And Joe makes truly world's best donut. Never had a better donut anywhere in your life. And now he's franchising, and you could own the rights to a Joe's franchise. Heck, he'll give you all of Houston as the territory, no problem there. But the problem is, does he really know what he's doing, or is it still all up in his head? And even if it's still up in his head, does he know how to source products locally? Does he know how to drive business, or did he just get lucky with where he was with his location? So as we go through this kind of evolution, where is the best place for you in the evolution of the franchise brand? If we really look at about 100 units, 100 units is right about midpoint on this, where by 100 units, it's been well vetted, it's been tested across large markets, small markets, rural markets, urban markets, and they really have their systems down. They're not still in the evolving stage. But at 100 units, we still don't have that name brand. If you really look at where we are, it's probably, 100 units even across 50 states would still only be 2 units per state if they were evenly divided. So not a lot of name brand recognition, but very strong from a system standpoint. And for my money, that's what we're looking for in a franchise is we want the system. I want to go through how to fail at franchising because it is a really important element to know how to avoid it. And it can definitely be counterintuitive. This is the don't try this at home kids. Do get professional help. People create messes when they try on their own, and that's where we see the highest failure rates, people that find franchises for the wrong reasons. So one of the things is when people say, I love the product, I use it myself, and a perfect example is ice cream. I go to the Little League games after Little League, we go for ice cream, and it's such a family-oriented environment, and wouldn't that be awesome? And there's always long lines. Well, maybe there's long lines because the owner can't manage employees or doesn't have enough employees. And maybe you're getting a long line after the Little League game, but how about in January in the afternoon? And how much are you going to have to invest? And is it really going to make you the money you want? And is there a question? I can see the chats coming, but I can't pull them up.
Yes, Adrian, but we'll hold the questions to the end, and unless somebody is really desperate to address something right now.
Okay. So going into something just because you love the product, not necessarily the path to success. The other is when people talk about a hobby, and a great example is golfers. And I don't know if we have any golfers on today, but I hear from people that are golfers, if I could eat, breathe, sleep golf, wouldn't that be awesome? And they get into a golf-oriented business, which typically means retail. And the problem with that is now they're sitting at a retail location while all their friends are out playing golf. And they're not necessarily making the kind of money they were before, so they don't necessarily have the money to play golf. If you really want to do something with your hobby, I know we talk about all the time, do something you love and you'll never work another day in your life. In franchising, it doesn't mean that the product is necessarily what you love. The golf ball, you love playing golf. You don't love the product surrounding it. So going into something because it's a hobby is probably a pretty good way to make sure you ruin that hobby. Another thing we hear is people going into something because it's consistent with their profession. We hear this from teachers, and teachers in the early days in particular went to Kumon because, hey, I can get out of the public school system and the politics, and I can still do what I love and teach kids. Well, in the tutoring concept, the owner's role is not to teach kids. You can hire tutors for $12 to $15 an hour. What the owner's role is to develop the business, develop the relationships, make the community aware of it, talk to school counselors, work with the parents. Somebody has to be driving the bus. And if the owner is spending all their time teaching kids, they're not doing the owner's role, and they end up not doing well in the business. So looking at something just because it's your profession may not be a good fit either. We hear a lot of times, I want to, what's hot today? What are the hot franchises? The problem with what's hot today is it may not be hot tomorrow. And this is where we see the biggest problems, because everybody thinks, oh, well, look at the Inc. 500, Success Magazine 500, or whatever top 100 list they're looking at. The problem with every single list out there is they're either there because they opened the most franchises last year, that would be Inc. Magazine. They have the most franchises overall, that would be like Success Magazine, or they're a paid placement. None of those mean that it's a good franchise. It just means there's lots of them. And some of the worst, most highly litigated, most unhappy franchisee systems are on those lists. Subway is a great example, most highly litigated franchise in the history of franchising. So lists are not necessarily a good way of finding something, not only because the top doesn't really matter, but if you're looking at things, people have a tendency to look at things that they know the product, or they frequent themselves, or they're familiar with, or think it's a hot industry. And none of that has anything to do with whether you can be successful in it as the owner, and what is the owner's role in that business? And those are the really important elements. So if none of those ways of looking at a franchise will work, now what do we do? And here's our criteria. What we're really looking for is the best in industry. And I want to emphasize best in industry is not the biggest. It may be, but that's not what the definition is. The definition of best is, first of all, does it have good franchisee validation? Are the franchisees that are in the system happy? Would they do it again? Are they making the kind of money they expected? You want to hear good things from those current franchisees. We also want to make sure it's a growth opportunity. So we want to capitalize on growth trends as opposed to something like Blockbuster that's past its prime. And the financial health of the franchisor is important. Is the franchisor making more money off of the ongoing royalties than from upfront franchise fees? Because what we don't want is we don't want to be in a churn and burn kind of organization where they just get more franchise fees over and over. And developing that critical mass in market share is also really important. I would much rather look at a franchise that only has 5 or 10 franchise units and they opened a year or two ago than one that's been around since 1990 and they have 50 franchisees. You know, with 50 franchisees after 40 years in business, that's not necessarily developing that critical mass. And of course, the financial returns are really important. When you look at financial returns, there's 2 elements. One, can it support you and your lifestyle? Will it get you to your goals? But 2, does the amount of the investment make sense for what the return is? What you don't want to be doing is investing $500,000 in something that's never going to net you anything more than $100,000 a year. So those are some of the elements that are important there. Another sweet spot is if you can find a fragmented market. And what I mean by a fragmented market is if you look at something like the hair care industry, 29% of the market is in the hands of franchises, 71% is still in the hands of independents. So, you know, franchising doesn't really create a market. Typically, there's lots of mom and pops that come around before franchises come into the marketplace. So if you can find something in those early stages of consolidation, that's a great sweet spot where you can compete against the mom and pops when you've got the right tools. Not saying anything negative about the mom and pops, but it's hard for one individual organization to have all the IT and all the systems and all the marketing developed that a franchise system can have. This is kind of a nice quote from Robert Kiyosaki, our author of the Cash Flow Quadrant, which is, entrepreneurship isn't risky, being unprepared is risky. So how do you succeed? And certainly we would say, get help from professionals. That's what we're here for. Can certainly help you, and I'll walk you through the process a little so you understand there really is a proven process to finding a franchise in the same way that there's a proven process for being in a franchise. And it starts with building your business model. And building your business model, we look at your skills and talents and interests and goals and values, and then based on that, find businesses that meet your abilities and meet your needs. The secret to finding the right franchise, it really does start with you, and really encourage you to be honest with yourself in this process. I had some gentleman one time say, you know, I'd really love to start a franchise, and when I asked about sales, which is one of the questions we have in terms of identifying skill sets, he said, well, I could sell, sure, I can sell. And his wife was in the meeting with him, and she looked at him and said, oh, honey, you sit in the corner at parties. And knowing that and being honest is really important. You know, it's not what you will do. If I offered you $1 million and you had to go out and sell all day tomorrow, for $1 million, everybody here could probably do that. But if I said, you've got to go out and sell every day for the next 10 years, I think it might be a different story. So let's really focus on what you enjoy. You're going to be investing your time as well as your money into this. Let's make sure it's something, your role is one that brings you joy. Your role is something that fits your skill set. It's something that you can be good at. So we really want to look at all of those elements. Then we want to look at the franchisors. And working with the franchisors, we probably spend more time in talking to franchisors and understanding what makes people successful in the various systems than we do in working with clients. But it's working between those two that we're able to make a match. We know what makes people successful in the various franchise systems. We know what franchisors are looking for. We know what the role of the franchisee is, and we know what the elements are in terms of the kind of employees that you would have and the kind of customers that you would have and the kind of marketing that needs to be done. Those are all the elements that we can make a match to make a safe opportunity available to you. So in finding the right franchise, when I said there's a proven research process, the first one is to select those franchises to consider. The next would be to have an initial phone interview with the franchisor. And I will say you can find out more in that initial phone interview than you probably can in 45 minutes on, or I'm sorry, 4 hours on the internet. After that, you get a copy of the FDD, which is the franchise disclosure document. And this is just to give you a brief look. They're all organized in exactly the same way. So you get all of the information that the Federal Trade Commission thinks you need to have in order to make a decision. You get the business experience as a management team. What is the initial investment? What kind of territory do you get? If they make any kind of earnings claim, what does it say in the earnings claim? And we'll talk about that at another point in time. Also, the outlets that they have, how many have they grown by in the past few years, and how many have they lost? So let's see what their retention rate of franchisees is. And there's a whole number of other important elements. I just wanted to highlight some for today. The heart and soul of the whole franchise research process is making these validation calls to franchisees, talking to people who are in the system and hearing what they have to say, and talk to people who are very successful and see what made them successful and what their background is. Talk to people that aren't successful, and you'll hear the difference between those two. Certainly having that business plan after you've made those calls and working with lenders to secure funds are also important elements if you're getting funding. And the very final step, Discovery Day, is where you typically go to the franchisor's headquarters, meet the management team, and it's that final gut check of, do I really think this is going to be a good fit for me? And the very final step is reviewing that agreement with the franchise attorney. And I really do mean franchise attorney. Business transactional attorneys make messes. They don't know what they should be looking for, and they frequently don't highlight things that should be discussed. At that point, then you should feel comfortable enough to decide yes or no and sign an agreement. And again, there may still be some fear, but it should be more like the fear of getting on a roller coaster, not like the fear of bungee jumping. At that point, you have the information, and you should feel as confident in signing that franchise agreement that you can make this a success as if you're taking a job in your industry, or don't do it. Why most people don't find the right business is that they look at what the business does as opposed to what the business can do for you. It's really about that lifestyle and about income and about your role and enjoying what you do. You know, having that work-life balance was one of the first things that was first and foremost to me. For other people, there's a lot of other elements, but the finances have to make sense as well. So I mentioned we are a free service, and we're free because the franchisors pay us a fee. So they only pay us a fee if someone makes an investment in a franchise, which is actually less expensive for the franchisors than doing large broadcast advertising across the entire country and perhaps not even getting qualified people. We're presenting them with qualified franchise candidates. So kind of a win-win-win all the way around. And this is perhaps one of the most gratifying for me, is that 90% of the people that we work with say, wow, I never would have picked this off a list, or I never even knew that was a franchise, but it fits me perfectly, and then go on to success. So I'll leave you with the thought of, if it were possible to reduce your risk to an acceptable level and find a business that's affordable, and confirm that you have the skills for it. Wouldn't you at least want to know what it is? Which is just my way of saying if you'd like to take the next step, by all means, I do have a profile, more of a profile than a questionnaire. The next step after filling out the profile would be to meet by Zoom in these days to build your business model and then start exploring the specific franchises. And then I stick with you till you come to a yes or no decision following that proven research model. So I'm kind of a cross between a research assistant, a coach, advisor, all of the above. So if you need any help, here is my information, and I would be delighted to have a conversation. And I did see that we have a number of questions. Salim, are you the keeper of the questions, or?
Actually, I think this is Tarek. Everybody can see the chat, and we can just go top to bottom. Salim has asked several questions himself on the chat. So from Salim, it says, royalty range is 6 to 10% of gross sales. How is this percentage determined?
So on either a weekly or typically a weekly basis, sometimes a monthly basis, whatever comes in through the point of sale system, if that's, $20,000 coming in and we have a 10% royalty, that is $2,000 going to the franchisor.
No, my question, Adrian, was more to do why some franchisees are asking 6%, others are charging 10%. What is it dependent on? Is the quality or the volume of the business, or what?
It can very much depend on what they're providing for that. And that's part of the question is, does it make sense? So, some franchisors provide lots of marketing assistance, and they answer the phone, and they have a call center, and they have all kinds of other elements, and that may be a higher percentage. Others are really providing you with a brand name and very little, and that may be even lower than the 6%. So it depends, and it can just be by reason of the franchisor. It's not that there's a mathematical formula.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned one thing, caveat, was that if you invest in a franchise business, best to do with an established franchise business. Is that very much true?
I'm sorry, say that again. If you invest in a franchise business, what?
Better invest in an established franchise business such as McDonald's, Subway, Ace Hardware, so on and so forth, for example. Is that true? Donuts, Tim Hortons Donuts, or other donuts shops and all that.
I'm still not sure I'm understanding the question. If you're investing in one of the big name brands, is it?
Well, if you invest in a franchise business, should you be investing in one big name business to be successful?
Oh, yeah, my answer to that was no, not at all. The big name does not necessarily guarantee your success in literally every franchise system out there, including McDonald's and Great Clips and Amco Transmissions and Subway. You have maybe 20% that are doing well and knocking the ball out of the park. You have 20% that are struggling, and then the rest are somewhere in between. So the big name brand does not guarantee you success any more than any other franchise.
So who chooses the location of a franchise business? Is that who offers the franchise business to you, or you who take the
It's usually
franchise
done. Yeah, it's usually done together. So, and it varies by franchise. Sometimes the franchisor has has real estate people that assist in the process. Sometimes they have pre-identified locations that they believe will be successful. But ultimately, you're the one that has the opportunity to decide whether you want to accept that location or not.
I see. Well, just my own story. I was involved in one franchise business. We lost money in it. It's a competitor to Subway, Submarina. We started in San Diego. They were successful in San Diego, but it was a time of 2008, 2009. I think that was one of the reasons. The other reason is the location. Well, I'm the one who finally forced it to be closed. but
Yeah.
just 5 of us were doing it together. So it was,
Yeah, food,
and Subway killed us as
food.
well by bringing it down the prices as well.
So there's a couple things there. You know, one, I said that I've only helped one person in a traditional food location who had a background in food. Food is by far and away the most difficult area to make it. You could have a fabulous food place. You know, if you think about what places you see, fabulous food place, and 6 months later you go by and it's out of business. It's a very fickle dining public. But I'd be willing to bet no one on the call has what they would call a fabulous dry cleaner. And yet you never see them go out of business. You know, dry cleaners are still, they stick around even though they break buttons and leave stains and everything else. So food is tough. And I also mentioned in another area talking about it's nice to have that sweet spot where you can go in and compete in a market where there's a lot of mom and pop. What you were going in against is kind of like going against Starbucks. You know, going against Subways can be tough. So it's not that kind of easier area to be successful in.
No, probably not. Yeah, we had access to all of Georgia, 1/3 of Florida, but as the first
Yeah.
incoming franchisee.
Oh.
But we
Yeah.
lost it actually.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay, next question, also from Celine. What's the franchise fee for a Chick-fil-A?
Chick-fil-A, gosh, I get that question more than any other. So Chick-fil-A is a weird hybrid. It's not really a franchise because you don't ever really own the store. You become a profit-sharing partner. So the last I looked, I think it was $10,000 to buy in. But you're buying the opportunity for a job. You're going to work that place as the general manager. You're not really the owner. So there's no equity event when you get out either. You're a profit-sharing partner. Now, I'm not saying anything negative about Chick-fil-A. Love Chick-fil-A. I will say your chances of getting the opportunity to have one of those, we'll call it a hybrid franchise opportunities, you have a better chance of getting into Harvard than you do of getting accepted to Chick-fil-A, statistically speaking.
so the
Yeah, good to
Chick-fil-A,
know.
other thing about the Chick-fil-A does not give you franchise status to people of all religious denominations. It only gives it to a specific religious group of people. You know that probably, right?
Yes, this is true too.
Yeah.
Okay, and now I have a question from Subhash Thakur. How convenient is it if I live many miles away from my franchise business location? Do I really need to live close by, at least in the same town, so I could be there quickly if needed?
It depends. So most of the time, the franchisor wants you to be an active owner participant in the franchise, and particularly when you're starting up. You know, when a franchise company first starts or a company starts and they have a choice of, do I want to be a franchise company or a company owned? Part of it is not just where does the money come from, and obviously in a franchise, individuals are investing as opposed to corporate stock investment or something. It's also a question of, we think we'll do better with the local owner operator. So if you say, well, I'm not going to be the local owner operator, I'm going to put in a manager, you're violating the whole premise of how to get, you know, what the franchisor is looking for, which is that local market presence, being the face of the business. Now, as I say that, there's plenty of franchises that over time will allow you to open more and more in multiple cities and things like that. Typically, they're not going to let you do that from the starting point.
Great, thanks. Next question also from Salim. Isn't there franchising in hotel and motel business? Though these days it's not expected to be a good one. And then he's also asked, what's the average return in a franchise business?
So the hotel business, yes, there are hotel franchises. I don't work with any of them. The investment level is typically beyond what most people that I could work with would have available, so it's just not an area we focus on. And the part two of that was what's the average
Average return in a franchise business?
return. It is all over the map. You
Hmm.
know, there's some franchise, and even within an individual franchise, it can be all over the map between the top performers and the bottom performers. So it's one of the pieces of the investigation process. You know, on the low end, there are franchises where people aren't making any more than $40,000 a year. Now, if they're only doing it on a part-time basis and they're doing it from home, and you know, that may not be bad, but that's one end of the scale. On the other end, you've got things like regional development opportunities and other opportunities. Manufacturing is an example, where you've got people that are making multi-hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You know, $500,000 a year is not unheard of, but it depends. And then even within the franchise system, where I'm saying the average might be 500,000, there's people that might be netting $1 million, and people that might only be netting 100,000. And some of that may depend on, are they new franchisees? Are they have they been in business for 8 years and had a chance to grow? Some of it may just be the operator. You know, some people don't do all of the investigation and really figure out what their role is. Some people have life changes, and well, they thought they wanted to work really hard and build the business. They suddenly decided, you know, maybe they have a personal issue and don't want to put that many hours into it. There's all kinds of reasons between top and bottom performers. And
Sure.
that's part of the investigation process. You'll hear that when you talk to them.
Right. Okay, thank you. This one is from Jason Lambert. How long does it typically take to recoup your initial investment, the franchise fee, any upfront capital items, before you begin generating a net profit?
So again, it depends. It depends on the franchise. I'd love to be able to give you a very specific answer. I will say there are some that, well, let's differentiate. Usually what we talk about in franchising is how long before you start being able to take money out. So there's more money coming in than there is going out. That's the first question. Getting your actual return on investment, how long does it take before you get back everything that you've invested and more? Typically, we're talking about somewhere over 2-3 years, something along those lines, being a good time frame to think of.
Yeah, good. I'm going to kind of encapsulate a bunch of, not really questions, but comments, and that is, people say that you did a great job. And
Well,
I have to say that too. You know, I've heard franchise presentations before that were kind of thinly veiled sales pitches, and you delivered what you promised. There wasn't anything salesy about it. And I like this comment here from Siva. Was not even sure if I wanted to attend this talk, you know, sort of like yourself, but way back when, but it was a great presentation and it got me interested. Didn't really realize there are other franchises beside retails. And saying no 3 people who went to franchise in the last 3 years. And your presentation made me want to talk to them about their experience. So really, really good job. I enjoyed it very much as well. Now, in terms of remaining questions, we're going to scroll down a little bit. Well, Gregory Devonish said, having investigated this a few years ago, my impression is the person selling the franchisor, right, is the one making the money. Also, it seems that the franchisor forces you to buy another outlet once you're making around $60,000 a year. Also, regional managers can manipulate the franchisors to eventually take over the franchise. So these are several different concerns. I just jump right in.
Yeah, so I don't disagree that there are opportunities like that out there. There are some great franchises and there are some terrible franchises. And not every franchise is created equal. And when you talk about regional managers that can manipulate things, absolutely. When you talk about franchises, Subway is notorious for that, forcing people to buy in order to keep making money because they keep putting them in closer. So, hey, we're going to put one. We've got this franchisee that owns this one, this franchisee that owns this one. We're going to put one here. You want to own it because it's going to eat into your market share. So you can own it or this guy can own it. Who do you want to own it? And if you don't own it, your own business is going down. And it is. There's some not warm and fuzzy sides. Usually that has to do with very large franchise brands. We're back to that, Salim, I know you asked, do you want to buy for safety that large empire type brand? And my answer is no. I think safety lies somewhere in the middle. I don't think it lies on the brand new side either. Brand new franchises go out of business with great regularity because they don't know what they're doing in the world of franchising. But investing in those big name franchises, you're also not, by the time they're a big name, getting in on the same terms that people got in the younger days.
Mm.
So,
Adrian, actually,
go
ahead. Sorry, no, you go ahead. Finish what you're saying.
I was just, it can be less warm and fuzzy from that standpoint also.
No, we did it because of the fact that we wanted to have the first movers advantage, and we established our own store. But I think I was not at the beginning of this. Have I known it? I depended on somebody who had 30 years of experience of building houses, multi-storied houses, etc. And he was in other food businesses as well. So I depended on them. Later on, when I joined, I found the location they chose was not a good location. It was beside Chick-fil-A. And Chick-fil-A, and also when Chick-fil-A was flooded, no parking, they used to come and park at our place. That was not also desirable. So there are some of these issues as well. So later on, when I learned about it, I said, oh my God. Of the 15 months, we made money. 2 months out of 13 months, we didn't do it. And it was 2008 and 2009.
That's a hard time to have started something too. That's definitely a challenge. So you had a number of things working against you.
Exactly so, yeah. That's what it is. Then we did
the
whole region of Georgia as well as 1/3 of Florida. I mean, if you're a latecomer, you don't have got that. So that was the other reason. And we had the money at that time to do it, so we did it.
Salim, pardon me for interrupting, but I noticed that we're losing a couple of folks. And I wanted to ask everyone for a favor before we address the last couple of questions, if this is okay. Could you all turn your video on, your webcams on, because we want to take a snapshot that shows all your smiling faces for the LinkedIn posting.
Yeah, I'm going to stop share there too.
Well, before you do that, Adrian, while Tarek does that, come back with your presentation and just put a slide that you'd like in the picture as well with everybody. I'll take a picture of a snap picture of everybody with your slide.
Let me try.
Just reshare.
Good, good. We're getting.
And while everybody else is bringing their video on, like Chris, Eric, Jason, Catherine, Ben.
Yes, please. Let's see your faces.
The host turned off my video, so I can't turn it on.
Oh.
Try, Chris. Give it a few seconds. Toby, you're welcome. Francisco, Farouk, Alex.
Jason has just said he's having an issue with his camera, so we won't be
Got
able
it. So I'll take a picture of both here, and I know Tarek is taking pictures individually.
Yes. Okay, so give you one last chance. Anybody that's not got their camera on, I've been taking a couple of shots already, so no problem. I'm surprised we can't see Alex, but there's Farouk. Thanks, Farouk. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, good, thanks.
Yeah, and Adrian, I have a question. I'm sure you also work with franchisors, franchisees that are wanting to retire and they want to sell their franchisers. Any comments on that? And also, does it have to be a franchise that's location that's never built there? And if you do, um, how do you get the help or finances to build?
I'm not sure I got the second part. The first part, the franchises that are already built that are selling, with that, so we're talking about maybe a franchisee that's been in business 8 years and now has decided to retire and they want to sell. The tricky part about finding those is that a lot of times those go to other franchisees within the system and they never come up on the open market. And if they don't go to other franchisees in the system, the question is why? And we have a lot of times we have owners that have terrible books and records. They're selling for the wrong reason. It's not that they're retiring, it's that the business is going down the tubes. Or we have people that just have unrealistic expectations and they're asking $1 million for a business that's worth $200,000. And it can be very tricky to find an existing business. I talk to people all the time that have been looking for business, and you ask how long? Oh, 2 years. You know, when you're looking at an existing business, it's very challenging to find a good one in your area and an industry that you're looking for. It's just a challenge. The other question I'm not sure I understood as far as getting the funding for, was it for buying an existing?
This was an extension of a question that Salim asked on location. How do you choose a location? And you thank you for the answer on that. So that location may need a building. It may need the means, you know, to go on with the. So how do you get the finances for building that building and so on?
So, you know, what you can finance does depend on what you have, and it depends on credit score. Typically in a startup franchise, if it's not actually involving a building, you're going to need somewhere between 25 and 30%, 35% down, and then financing is available for the balance. But it does depend. It's kind of an inverse relationship. The more you have to invest, the more financing is available. The lower investments, banks are simply not interested in making $50,000 loans. You know, particularly these days when we've got all the PPP loans that they're focusing on. If you're not doing a loan of at least $150,000, it's going to be very hard to get a bank interested. So ironically, you've got more financing available for the more expensive opportunities. If there's real estate involved, you may be able to get a blended rate on both the land and the business, and sometimes put down as little as 10–15%. So once again, the answer is it depends.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions. People have been waiting patiently to hear the answer. One from Anna, and that is, when a franchise/brand company is bought out, what happens to your franchise?
Well, it depends. A lot of times it's bought out by a private equity firm or another company that does franchising that's now going to put that brand under their umbrella. So there may not be many changes at all, or it may get additional support and cash infusion from that purchase. It could be a really good thing. If it's going to be bought out, typically they're buying it for the franchise system. I think a question that goes along with that, what would happen if your franchise system went out of business? And typically, if your franchise system went out of business, you can keep the name, you keep operating, you just don't pay royalties anymore. But you're not going to get the support anymore either.
Yeah. Okay, Herman would like to know if you've heard of any franchises offering drone services. That's a particular need in the oil and gas industry, and it kind of fits the experience of some of this group.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The only one that involves drones that I'm aware of is one that does it for real estate. And whether that could be an add-on service in the oil and gas is kind of an interesting choice. But yes, they do have, although let's think about that. That's the only one I can think of.
Okay. And then I think the last actual question here comes from Chris Mayo, who asked, are there search board sites, websites for finding franchises?
There are. Going to the sites is probably about as useful as looking at those listings, because again, people have a tendency to look at what they know, what they think, you know, they're interested in from a customer standpoint, but it doesn't tell you how much money you can make. It doesn't tell you what the owner's role is. But franchise opportunities is one. Franchise, that's the biggest one. They have opportunities on Biz Buy Sell. There's a franchise opportunities section. I will tell you, click on something and you will get bombarded by thousands of emails and you will never get off the list. So you may want to have a separate email that you send things like that too.
Oh yeah, that's all. What we need is more spam mail.
Right.
Okay, I don't see any more questions unless somebody wants to chime in on their mic. I'll turn it back over to Carlos and Salim and to get on with their next presentation. And thanks
Thank you
so much,
Tarek.
Adrian. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Adrian and Tarek as well. And Adrian, are you going to